Service with the Royal Canadian Air Force during the Second World War began a lifetime in aviation for Ross Lennox. Post-war, he flew as a bush pilot, established records as a helicopter pilot, served as chief test pilot with Pratt & Whitney Canada, and continued with commercial flying after retirement. Born on Christmas Day, 1922, William Ross Lennox was the middle child of three sons born to his parents, William and Helen. Ross, as he was known, had an older brother, Alan, and a younger brother, Richard. After completing his education at schools and college in Winnipeg, on March 11, 1942, Ross signed up with the Royal Canadian Air Force. His brother Alan was already serving in the Army. Ross reported to Number 2 Manning Depot in Brandon, formerly the home of the Brandon Winter Fair Arena building. After initial training school in Saskatoon, Ross was posted to Number 19 Flying Training School at Virden, Manitoba, where he logged his first flight on August 31, 1942, in a de Havilland Tiger Moth. Posted to Gimli, Manitoba as a 21-year-old flying instructor, Ross Lennox had other postings in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. Then, late in the war, flew the Douglas Dakota DC-3 at Comox, British Columbia. Then transferred overseas to RCAF 436 Squadron in England, flying DC-3s, to pick up wounded soldiers in Europe for transport to medical attention in England. After the war, in 1946, his first job was as a flying instructor with the Flin Flon Flying Club. Next was flying geologists, prospectors, and miners in light aircraft from Flin Flon. Starting in 1948, Ross began flying for Hudson Bay Air Transport at the controls of Grumman Mallard, Cessna Crane, Nordine Norseman, and de Havilland Beaver aircraft on floats. Flying for exploration work with the company took him to northern Saskatchewan, the Northwest Territories, northern British Columbia, and the Yukon. In 1953, Ross was sent to Okanagan Helicopters to train on Bell helicopters, flew Sikorsky models in Connecticut, then flew helicopters for Hudson Bay Air Transport. In March 1958, Ross joined Okanagan Helicopters to service posts of the Distant Early Warning Line in the Arctic and the Mid-Canada Line, flying Sikorsky S-55 helicopters. By February 1963, Ross joined United Aircraft of Canada, which became Pratt & Whitney Canada in 1975. His first assignment was a project with the Royal Canadian Navy as a test pilot for Sikorsky Sea King helicopters. Ross Lennox was the only pilot to fly all 41 Sea Kings built for the Navy. Although no helicopter had ever made an unescorted transatlantic flight, in May 1965, Ross led a crew flying a Sea King helicopter from Connecticut to Oslo, Norway, taking over 2 weeks for the record-setting flight. As a test pilot with Pratt & Whitney Canada, Ross was involved in pioneer testing on the now famous PT-6 turboprop aircraft engine, first run in 1960. Starting with early testing of the engine on Beech 18 aircraft, Ross saw the engine through to completed testing that led to 51,000 variants of the PT-6 now produced. Ross had a lead role for testing of the PW100 turboprop engine introduced in 1984, the engine used for the Bombardier Dash 8, an aircraft serving several airlines. Ross was also the lead pilot on the testing of the Pratt & Whitney turbofan engine introduced in 1967, used on the Cessna Citation and other small jet aircraft. In 1969 and through the early 1970s, Ross was the only Canadian pilot at the time to fly the Sikorsky Sky Crane on government projects in northern Canada. He worked in assessing ship-to-shore heavy-lift helicopter systems for marine cargo deliveries and flying the Sky Crane for tower installations on James Bay hydropower projects. Named Chief Test Pilot and Head of Flight Operations for Pratt & Whitney Canada in 1977, he held the position until his retirement from the company in 1982. Ross then joined Erickson Aircrane, which had acquired manufacturing rights for the Sikorsky S-64 Sky Crane helicopter, and served both as pilot and as marketing representative to promote the helicopter as safe and effective for heavy lifting. From 1983 to 1993, Ross flew for fishing lodges on Great Bear and Great Slave Lakes, flying otters on floats, and a DC-3, the aircraft he flew 50 years earlier during the Second World War. When Ross finally retired as a pilot, he had logged over 23,400 hours in 63 different types of fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters over a span of 50 years. Married to Gladys in 1948 and predeceased by her in 2009, Ross continued to spend precious time with his family and celebrated his last birthday with children John, Chuck, Gina, and Donna Lee. He died on November 1, 2013, at the age of 90. William Ross Lennox was inducted as a member of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame at ceremonies held in Ottawa on June 9, 2016.